Hello students, this is Dr. Shabana Begum presenting a talk on the topic the concept of ecological niche pertaining to the subject Zoology 5th semester paper 5 entitled Environmental Biology and Ecology. The main objectives of the topic are to define the terms ecological niche, to explicit different types of niches with examples, and to understand Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. The contents are the introduction of the concept of ecological niche, the types of ecological niches, and Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. In my previous lecture, I have discussed about the concept of habitat. And today, let us understand the concept of ecological niche. Ecological niche is a term for the position of a species within an ecosystem, describing both the range of conditions necessary for persistence of the species and its ecological role in the ecosystem. The term niche was first used and coined by the naturalist Joseph Grinnell in the year 1927. According to him, the niche is the sum of the habitat requirements that allow a species to persist and produce offspring. Like him, a number of ecologists have also proposed various definitions and concepts for a niche. Charles Sutherland Elton, in the year 1927, who is a British ecologist, gave the first working definition of the niche concept. He defined an animal's niche as its place in the biotic environment, its relation to food and enemies. The term niche does not include, except indirectly, any consideration of the function the species serve in the community, according to Dice in the year 1952. Clark in the year 1954 distinguished two separate meanings for the term niches, the functional niche and the place niche. Hutchinson in 1957 defined niche as the total range of conditions under which the individual lives and replaces itself. The niche concept was popularized by the zoologist G. Evelyn Hutchinson in 1957. The Hutchinsonian niche views niche as a n-dimensional hypervolume where the dimensions are environmental conditions and the resources that define the requirements of an individual or a species to practice its way of life. Eugene P. Odom in the year 1959 defined the niche as the position or status of an organism within its community and ecosystem resulting from the organism's structural adaptation, physiological responses, and specific behavior. He emphasized that the ecological niche of an organism depends not only on where it lives or where one would go to find it, it is habitat. So one can say that the ecological niche is the functional status or the profession of an organism in its community. A habitat can contain more than one niche. For example, both the oceanic tuna fish and the herring fish occupy the same habitat, that is, they are surface dwellers, and both are carnivorous. The tuna fish feeds on the herring and the herring fish feeds on zooplanktons. But they occupy different niches mainly because they pursue different food. Another example is the kangaroo, bison and cow, although not closely related taxonomically, occupy the same niche when present in a grassland ecosystem. Types of niches. According to Eugene P. Odom, ecological niches are of three types: the spatial or habitat niche, trophic niche, and multidimensional or hypervolume niche. Let us discuss about the concept of spatial niche. Spatial niche is also called as a habitat niche, and it represents the ultimate distributional or spatial unit occupied by a species. In brief, a particular habitat shared by several species. Each of the species may be confined to its own microhabitat or a spatial niche, because no two species in the same general territory can occupy for long identically same ecological niches. Citing an example, O'Neill in the year 1967 had identified 7 different species of millipedes and described their spatial niches. All these species live in the same general habitat, the forest floor of a maple oak forest. And the 7 different species are Eurus erythropygus, which lives in the center of the log in the heartwood; Pseudopolydesmus serratus, which occupies the superficial wood of the log; Narcissus americanus lives beneath the bark but on the outer surface of the log; Scytonotus granulatus lives under the log but on the log surface; Fontaria virginiensis lives or occupies the undersurface of the log but on the ground; Cleidogonia scissioannularis is found in the litter within the leaves; Abacian lacterium is found to live beneath litter on the ground surface. Hence, the millipedes, though belonging to different species, all are concentrated around the log but occupy different spatial niches. Next, what is trophic niche? The concept of trophic niche was given by Charles Sutherland Elton, who stressed on the relationship between the organism and the source of energy. As we know, sometimes two species live in the same habitat but occupies different trophic niches because of differences in their food habits. For example, the oceanic tuna fish and the herring fish, which I have described in the general introduction. The other examples being the aquatic bugs, Notonecta and Coryxa, which live in the same pond but occupy different trophic niches. The former, that is, the Notonecta, is an active predator that swims about, grasping and eating other animals. But the latter, that is, the Coryxa, feeds largely on decaying vegetation. Next example is the house sparrow called Passer domesticus and the commonly found crow, Corvus splendens, live in close association with humans and occupy the same habitat. The sparrow feeds on grains and kitchen waste, and the crow is a scavenger. It feeds on the dead rats, young chicks, eggs, termites, apart from foodstuffs. The next is multidimensional niche. As we know, multidimensional niche refers to the position of the organism in its environmental gradients of moisture, wind, temperature, pH, etc. G. Hutchinson in the year 1957 suggested that the niche could be visualized as a multi-dimensional space of hypervolume within which the organism or a group of organisms can survive indefinitely because the environment is conducive. It refers to the position of the organism in its environmental gradients of moisture, humidity, wind, temperature, pH, etc. Hutchinson introduced the two terms, fundamental niche and realized niche, and tried differentiating between the two. The fundamental niche is the maximum space occupied by the organism when it is not under any constraints, as there are no predators or competitors. For example, the maximum space and freedom enjoyed by an herbivore like a deer in a luxuriant green forest area if there are no other herbivores around as competitors, or if no predators are found such as lions and tigers. This situation actually cannot exist in nature. An organism free of interference from other species could use the full range of conditions and resources in which it could survive and reproduce, which is called its fundamental niche. The fundamental niche of the organism can be defined as the space within a hypervolume, a volume with more than 3 dimensions determined by the intersection of all of those ranges of critical factors. The fundamental niche represents the range of conditions in which the organism could survive if it were the only one in the environment. If the second species added, it might reduce the resources used by the first species or prey upon the first species so successfully in certain places that the first species cannot survive there. The realized niche is a smaller space occupied by the organism under constraints of competition and predation. The deer has to survive with competitors and hide from predators. The space now occupied by the deer becomes reduced. The realized niche is a space within the fundamental niche. Even among human beings, the fundamental niche is the maximum space occupied by an individual when there are no constraints such as other people around. There are no competitors for food, space, or mates in the fundamental niche. If there are other people around sharing his space and competing for food and mate, the space he occupies will be definitely reduced is his realized niche. Another interesting principle given by Gauss is as follows, and it is called as Gauss's principle of competitive exclusion. Gauss a Russian biologist in the year 1934 postulated that no two forms can share exactly the same ecological niche for an indefinite period of time. Eventually, one will replace the other. According to Gauss's principle, each mode of life is filled by just one species. Niches may overlap, but a single niche is inhabited by only one form. Since this principle bears directly on the conception of computation, the principle is also called Gauss's principle of competitive exclusion. He conducted an experiment to prove his principle on the Paramecia species. By growing the two species of Paramecium under similar conditions of temperature and light, Gauss made sure that the niches occupied by the two populations were identical. The two species are the Paramecium caudatum and the Paramecium aurelia. During experimentation, every time when these two species are grown together, the Paramecium caudatum declined in number and after some time completely disappeared, while the Paramecia aurelia was always the winner in the competition. But when they were grown together, this was the condition. When they were grown individually in separate culture media, they thrived well because there was no competition for the resource. The outcome of Gauss's experiments is that no two species can exist or survive on the same limiting resources at the same time. Species with identical resources requirements cannot coexist. This is called the Gauss's principle or the principle of competitive exclusion. The principle of competitive exclusion is essential in nature. There are millions of species on the earth and they coexist even in the face of competition provided their niches do not overlap. When more competitors enter a habitat, each species now look for food resources in a limited area. This is called ecological compression. When competition is reduced, the species increases the range of habitats in which they look for food. In the face of competition, there is division of resources or resource partitioning. However, closely related the organisms are, there is bound to be some niche difference. What is the outcome of the study? As we have seen, the ecological niches allow species to exist in their environment. Under the right conditions, the species will thrive and play a unique role. Without the ecological niches, there would be less biodiversity and the ecosystems would not be in balance. Lastly, no two species or organisms can occupy the same niche for a long time for the same resources. After some time of their coexistence, one species displaces the other. With this, I will conclude my discussion on the topic concept of ecological niches. Thank you.